I think a lot of you have probably heard of the Oni before. Most often they are associated with demons, but it would be more correct to call them ogres instead. I can easily see how the two would be confused as they look very similar. Terrifying horned monsters, often with red skin. A very odd coincidence, isn't it? In any case, tonight I bring you something a bit different though. We're not here to talk about any run-of-the-mill Oni. Oh no. Tonight I'll tell you a tale of the king of the Oni, who almost became ruler of all Japan. That Oni was called Shuten Doji, or roughly translated, the Drunken Boy, due to his love of drinking even as a child. There are very many stories about Shuten Doji, but the one we're looking at today explains his whole life from humble beginnings. It was a beautiful spring day in a small village when Shuten Doji was born. His mother was a young field worker, but no one knew for sure who his father was. Some had rumored him to be none other than the dragon Yamato no Orochi. Shuten Doji's mother was in severe pain, which would come as no surprise to the rest of the village as she had been pregnant for almost 2 whole years. When Shuten Doji finally arrived, he was a little more advanced than most children. He was born with a full head of hair and a mouth full of teeth. This was odd indeed, but everyone was mainly relieved that he wasn't dragon-looking at all and looked perfectly human. Shuten Doji was exceptionally smart and strong for his age. In fact, he began walking only a few weeks after he was born. If you were passing through the village and saw Shuten Doji playing with the other children, you really wouldn't notice much difference other than he was a bit faster than all the others in foot races, stronger in sports, and spoke very eloquently for a child. Over time, however, other differences began to show. Despite having a tight-knit and supportive village, Shuten Doji began to develop a particularly mean streak. He looked down on the rest of the village as they were clearly inferior to him, even the adults. Even though Shuten Doji was only a few years old, he also had a love for drinking. It was all the village could do to keep him out of the sake storehouse. Before long, the terrible combination of nasty pranks and heavy drinking were more than his mother and the village could handle. It was at this point that Shuten Doji was sent to live in discipline at a temple in the mountains. Time after time the monks disciplined Shuten Doji, but to little effect. As he grew, they had very few ways they could control him, as he was stronger, faster, and unfortunately much more clever than they. It was one night at a festival that Shuten Doji finally pushed too far with his mean pranks. He showed up to the festival that night unreasonably drunk, wearing an Oni mask, and terrified as many of the elderly monks as he could. As he returned to his room afterwards and attempted to remove the Oni mask, he found that it had become permanently fused to his face. The monks scolded and teased him, and in a shamed rage he ran off into the mountains so he wouldn't have to deal with humans again. Years went by, and Shuten Doji grew more terrible looking and deformed. He also grew much meaner and would rob, kidnap, or murder anyone who ventured into his mountains. Over time, his banditry attracted other evil humans who would join him. Almost like a virus, they too would inevitably become horribly disfigured Oni as well. As his gang grew into an army, they began to sweep across the land, terrorizing village after village, recruiting the worst of each village along the way. By this time, Shuten Doji had constructed a palace on Mount Oe, and was deep in plans to overthrow the emperor himself. Word of this finally reached the emperor, and he recruited the legendary warrior Minamoto no Yorimitsu and his companions to deal with the threat. Armed with a special poison, the heroes snuck into the palace and poisoned the sake. Since not a one amongst the Oni horde could resist drinking, they all soon fell fast asleep, allowing Minamoto to chop off their heads one by one. As if to prove how truly mean he was, Shuten Doji continued to try and bite the hero long after his head had been removed. The head was then buried and is probably still snapping and gnashing underground to this very day. Thanks again for listening to another episode of Yokai Stories. Just like the last episode, I went into a little bit more storytelling this time around. I'm really interested to hear your feedback. Do you like storytelling, or do you want just the facts? Let me know in the comments below. I want to keep this fun for all of us.